Alright, now let's see how to nest the loops. We can nest loops. We can nest any type of loop within another or itself. You will need to use a loop inside another one so many times in your work. This is very useful but generally costly thing. So you need to be careful about that. If you don't really need it, do not use because it increases the cost. But anyway, you generally need to use that. We can use labels for loops. As we have seen in blocks, we can use labels for the loops. We write our label before the loop keyword in basic loops. And for while and for loops, we write before while and for keywords. Besides, we can write the name of labels at the end of end loop statement to increase clarity. If you use an exit keyword inside an inner loop, it will not finish the outer loop. It will finish only the corresponding loop. But we can use labels to exit the outer loop. If we label outer loop, we can use exit command with the label and finish both inner and the outer loop at the same time. This is really good. Now, let's see how to use it in an example. Let's write our set server output on first. Let's execute and delete that. By the way, I don't want to write that again and again. Actually, there is one more way too in SQL Developer. We just click on View and DBMS Output. Then in the window appeared below, we click on the plus sign and select the HR and OK. This way is also a really efficient way, but you need to do the clicking on plus sign and OK in every session. It's a little faster way than writing the set server output on command, but the cons of this is, as you can see, DBMS output window also takes some extra space on the screen. So I don't like to see this because we generally do not print so much things on the screen in PL SQL developing. So I'm used to write set server output on, but you can drag this window to somewhere you wish. For example, the left bottom place, I think. But I won't do that. I will run this set server output on before I create my lesson. I will run this set server output on before I create my lesson, so that this will not take any more time. So if you see that my code puts the output without writing the set server output on command, that means I ran that before. Very good. Let's continue writing our code now. Write declare. Now I will declare an inner variable. I will use that later. So we inner number is equal to 1 and begin. I said that we can use any type of loops for nesting a loop or for labeling. So let's start with for loop, for example. For we outer in 1.5 and loop. Now let's print our v outer variable to see the outer value in each iteration of the outer loop, which is our for loop in here. So dbms output.putLine. Let's write my outer value is our v outer variable. Now let's assign a value of 1 to our inner variable. Why to do that? Because I want this variable to start from 1 in each iteration. So we inner is equal to 1. Now let's write a basic loop inside of our for loop. When we do that, that means we nested these two loops. So let's create our loop then. In here, I need to increase my variable value to avoid an infinite loop. I want my variable to increase by 1 in each iteration of my inner loop. So I write we inner, Let me correct here too. Is equal to v inner plus 1. Now, let's print our inner variable value with some spaces to distinguish from the outer variable. So let's copy that and paste in here, and my inner value is v inner, and put some spaces. Since we created a basic loop, we need to write our exit when command. For example, in here I want to exit when the multiplication of inner and outer value reaches 15, for example. So let's write exit when v inner times v outer greater or equal to 50. Now let's end our inner and outer loops. And let's end our block. Great, we are ready to launch. Before running, let me explain what we did in here. The aim of our code is creating a nested loop. We know that we can use the same type or different types of loops nestedly. So we used for loop first. We called this as the outer loop. Then we wrote another loop inside of our for loop. We called that loop as inner loop. We specified that when the multiplication of these two values reaches 15, exit the inner loop. The outer loop is certain. It finishes when it iterates 5 times. Now let's run our code and see what happens. Let me correct put lines and clear up here and run again. As we can see, our outputs are shown in both DBMS output and our script output. So let me close this DBMS output window. Perfect. We have two different outputs now. The indented output are from the inner loop and the others are from the outer loop. So let's go to the top and trace our outputs. Our outer values started from 1 and printed. Then the code continued and entered into the inner loop. Let me show that. Our inner loop started from 2 and iterated 14 times because we said that exit when v inner times v outer is equal or greater than 50. Since v outer is 1, it iterated until v inner reached to 50. Then the multiplication reached to 15 and exited the inner loop. But the outer loop still continues. As we can see, inner value is 50. Then the outer value increased to 2 automatically because this is for loop, and for loop increases the counter variable in each iteration by 1. This time our inner loop iterated for 8 times because our multiplication passed the value of 15 now. Even if nothing changed in the code, it iterated 14 in the first time and 8 in the second. If we scroll down, we can see that the inner loop iterated less than 1 before. Then the total iteration finished when the outer loop variable reached to 5. Now, we iterated in nested loops and said that if the multiplication reached 15, exit the inner loop. Can we do that for the outer loop? I mean, can we finish the outer loop inside of the inner loop? Yes, with using labels. Let's remember the labels in the blocks. We had some labels to specify an alias for that block. With that way, we could reach to the value of the outer blocks. In for loops, the logic is the same but the opposite. What I mean is, the idea of labeling is reaching to somewhere that we cannot reach normally. But in loops, we reach to the outer loop. The usage is the same. 2 less than signs, then our alias, then our greater than signs. But in here, if we are using basic loops, we write our alias just before our loop keyword. If we use while loops, it is written just before the while keyword. If it is for loops, we use it before the for keyword, not before the loop keywords. Be careful on that. One thing to add. If you write the names of the labels just after the end loop keywords, it will increase readability. Now, let's go to our example and do our labelings. Before changing our loop, let's pin our result to compare with the new one later. Now let's add our label for the outer loop in here. Since this is a for loop, I will add the label just before the for keyword. Outer loop. Our inner loop labeled into here. This is a basic loop, so I write the label just before the loop keyword. Now, I want to reach the outer loop and say that if our multiplication reaches to 16, exit the whole loop, both the inner loop and the outer loop. Now, I will use the outer loops label in here. I write label just after the exit keyword. So, exit outer loop when, let me copy that, is greater than 60. I wrote my exit for the outer in here because if I put it after the exit below, it would be an unreachable code. Now, I will add the labels just after the end loop keywords so that we can understand easier that which loop's end it is. So this is the outer loop and this is the inner loop. What we did in here is we labeled our loops and then reached to the outer loop with using its label and exited the whole loops from the inner loop. Normally, if we write an exit keyword inside of the inner loop, only the inner loop exists. But if we use labels with exit keywords, we can reach to the outer loops too. Perfect. Now let's run our query and see the difference. Now let's expand our script output and check the outputs. Let's scroll up. Okay, first our outer variable is 1. It entered to the inner loop and iterated until 50. If you look at the exit keyword in our code, we have two exits. The first one searches for the 16 and the next one searches for the number 50. If the first one matches, the next one will not be checked because the cursor will directly go to the end of the end loop keyword of the outer loop. If you look at the variable values, the outer is 1. The inner looped until the value is 50. When the value is 15, the multiplication is 15 now. So it passed the outer loop exit and matched with the second exit command. So the inner loop finished and the cursor went to the next line of the end loop keywords of the inner loop. Then, since the for loop has not finished yet, the cursor went to the next line of the for in loop keywords. So it printed that my outer value is 2 now. Then the inner value is assigned to 1 and then entered to inner loop again. Now let's scroll the script downwards. Good. We can see that our inner loop iterated until the value reached to 8. This time our first exit command worked because the multiplication of inner and outer variables reached to 60. Then it finished the other loop even if it has not iterated 5 times. If this would not match, it would iterate exactly 5 times because this is a for loop and we selected 5. But with this way, we canceled the next iterations and sent the cursor to the next line of the end loop of the other loop. Fine, I tried to explain the nested loops in details. You can use any loops nestedly. If we talk about the labels, labels are really very helpful things. We saw 2 different usages of labels. We have some more uses too, like go to and continue statements. We will see them in next lessons. So this is enough for the nested loops, and this is the end of nested loops lesson. See you in the next lessons.